Good evening, I'm Mike Knetter, and welcome to the UW Now Livestream series, where we bring you experts from the UW community to talk about timely and important topics. Increasingly, consumers want to support companies that share their values, and employees want to work for mission-driven organizations. How has the ESG, environmental, social, and governance movement impacted businesses? And what sort of best practices have companies adopted as they shift to business models that appeal to their own or their consumers' values? And how do investors promote and implement ESG principles? Tonight, we speak to leaders from consumer, producer, and investment management organizations to gain a holistic view of how ESG is shaping the future. Joining us tonight are Ratish Nambudri from the Kohler Company, Erik Sen from Johnson Controls, and Jon Stoyer from Calvert Research and Management. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I look forward to a comprehensive overview of ESG and how it's shaping business. Kicking us off tonight is Ratish Nambudri, Director of Innovation for Good and Sustainability at the Kohler Company, where he leads the company's internal incubator focused on developing and implementing new business solutions that have a social purpose, and for leading enterprise-level sustainability strategy and performance. Ratish has been a sustainability champion throughout his career at Kohler, from designing HVAC systems and implementing energy-efficient building solutions to bringing water-efficient plumbing products to market. Recently, he led Kohler's work with the closed-loop advanced sanitation system project, an effort jointly funded by Kohler and the Gates Foundation to develop sustainable sanitation solutions around the world. Ratish, thanks for being here with us, and please tell us a bit about how Kohler is meeting the moment, as we say, in the ESG landscape today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me? Yes. Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. It really is an honor for me to be here today, especially with like-minded folks and hopefully a like-minded audience who's really interested in hearing about this. So yeah, I think it's I wanted to talk a little bit about what this means to us and how we approach the topic of ESG, right? So Kohler Company, for those of you who are familiar with it or not familiar with it, we've been around for a little over 145 years. We're a large manufacturer of plumbing products, as most of you probably know us for, but also power products, and also a premier provider of hospitality services in certainly the Wisconsin area, but also outside of it. The topic of social impact, being a community and an environmental steward, is something that really has been in our foundations through our heritage of over 145 years. And I'll tell you a little bit about what that means from a consumer perspective. So we have a lot of research from our consumers around who are our consumers, who is a typical Kohler buyer, what do they care for, what do they value, and things like that. And one of the things that we've heard over and over again over the past few years in this research is a big percentage of our Kohler consumer really is the kind that identifies themselves as someone who takes personal responsibility and accountability to make a positive contribution to the community where they live. And that's really important to note. And many of our consumers identify themselves as environmentalists. And that word could mean different things to different people. But the way I take it and the way we interpret it is really they want to buy products and they want to sign up for services that actually help them make a positive contribution to the environment. So I think about what is the role that Kohler can play in helping them do that. And there's a Gallup poll that someone actually forwarded me today, interestingly enough, that showed that over 80% of consumers value ESG, but do not understand the term ESG, right? So it's interesting. So they value that a brand actually cares for the environment or is a steward of the community where they operate, and is taking care of their employees, treating their employees with, with respect, is, stands for social justice and that sort of thing, but don't really understand the term ESG. This is where I think, we as manufacturers really have an opportunity, and perhaps more importantly, a responsibility, in making sure that we communicate this in a very simple and a succinct manner to our consumer, right? As it's important that the consumer understands from our language, from our communication, that this is how they can actually get engaged with actually making an impact to the environment or to the local community where they live, and how can Kohler help enable them to do that? At Kohler, ESG is like I said, it's not new, and we look at ESG through a platform that we call Believing in Better. It really is built on the philosophy that our best can always be better. So we have three dimensions for believing in better. It's really about better planet, better communities, and better lives. And that is the lens we use for decision making when it comes to large investments in the company. So, for example, from a better planet standpoint, right? How can we design products that actually have a positive environmental footprint? How can we reduce the environmental impact of our manufacturing operations so that they actually drive efficiencies and cost reductions as well, but also have a positive environmental impact. So how do we drive these things into our key investment decisions to drive better planet strategies, better communities, and better lives? Better communities is really about the growth and economic development of the communities where we live and operate. And better lives is really about equity, right? So how do we promote the equitable access of basic human rights, like access to clean water, clean and safe drinking water, and safe sanitation that I would assume many of us on this call take for granted. So I think, but there's a third of the population in the world that does not have access to those basic services. So what can we do in our capacity and based on our competencies to really bring our innovation, product development, and our global reach to bear and to really solve this problem? So that's kind of the framework we use, Believing in Better, to think about how can we drive large investment decisions or our product development decisions or operational decisions from the Believing in Better lens, right? How can we make sure that we sharpen our pencil, so to speak, as we're making these choices, and we think about how do we design our processes to be environmentally friendly? How do we design our products to be environmentally friendly? How do we innovate so that we can actually bring access to safe drinking water and sanitation to some of the underserved communities around the world that don't have access to it today? So it's, for us, the biggest thing, Mike, to what you asked for, you were asking about earlier, is really about how do we succinctly communicate this to the consumer? We're seeing over and over again that the consumers are really asking for brands to take that responsibility, and we're seeing this even with our employees and even our supply chain partners. So how do we communicate broader across all of our stakeholder groups in a way that's simple and succinct, helps them really understand what is how do we define ESG, what does ESG mean to us, and how do we integrate that lens into business strategy and decision making within our businesses? And most importantly, as a consumer, what can they do to be a part of it and actually have a great experience using our products, but at the same time, as they do it, also have a favorable impact on the environment. So that's really how we approach ESG across Kohler.
Thank you, Ritesh, for that overview, and I'm sure we'll have some audience questions in a moment. Our next speaker is Erik Sen, Vice President of Global Digital Business Development for Johnson Controls. He leads development and support of global sales programs and enablement for the product business units and regions for digital sales. Prior to joining Johnson Controls, he led sales for Utopus Insights, a renewable energy analytics startup company. His industry experience spans aerospace to GE's intelligent platforms and digital energy businesses to Electric Imp, an early Internet of Things innovator in Silicon Valley. He's driven revenue generation with hardware and software services for value-based solutions. Erik received his electrical engineering degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he also played varsity soccer and was part of a team that went to nationals. Thanks for joining us, Erik.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me here too. It's hard to believe that UW Coach Trask is going to be having us back this fall for the 40th anniversary of the UW men's soccer team's first participation in the NCAA tournament. So thanks for having me participate today. As we talk about ESG, sustainability has always been at the heart of our business, and it's fundamental to everything that we do at Johnson Controls. Our OpenBlue connected technologies and digital capabilities help our own business and our customers optimize asset performance, enhance the occupant experiences, and also meet the energy and environmental goals to deliver on our vision of healthy buildings, healthy people, and healthy planet. Nearly half of Johnson Controls revenues come from products and services that cut energy use and improve the sustainability for our customers. Building on our history of sustainability leadership, we committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions before 2040 and announced our science-based targets for 2030. We set a goal to double our customers' emission reductions through the implementation of our OpenBlue digitally enabled solutions too. And we're enabling and elevating our sustainability as a key performance metric for preferred suppliers while we're launching a supplier cohort training that's an initiative to cut supplier emissions. Last year, we launched our OpenBlue platform for optimizing building sustainability that'll be central to fulfilling these goals. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we're committed to building a diverse and inclusive team that'll help us continue to attract the best talent and drive the best-in-class performance for our products and services. We intend to double the representation of women leaders globally and our minority leaders in the United States over the next 5 years. And we're launching an initiative to educate the next generation of diverse, sustainable building industry leaders in a partnership with historically Black colleges and universities. So there are many forces that are driving the focus on sustainability. They're multiple and they're reinforcing. You've got government policies about driving carbon reductions. China's pledged to be carbon neutral by 2060. The European Community pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. There's actually a community recovery fund of 1.2 trillion with 30% of that dedicated to climate. And of course, we'll hear, I think John will talk a little more about the Biden administration and they're rejoining the Paris Accord, and also about the financial industry requiring climate action plans, state streets engaging companies with low ESG scores, voting against companies that don't have a robust diversity disclosure, and that'll be starting in 2022. You can hear about companies like Danone or even Exxon, where there's been change of leadership that has been pushed by their shareholders. It really shows that we need to be able to be beholden to not just our customers, but our employees, our shareholders, and the community as a whole. As far as demographics are also pushing this, millennials are more diverse. The majority of 17-year-olds in the US are diverse. The majority of new corporate hires in 2019 were diverse. And the majority of bachelor, master, and PhD degrees are being earned by women. 40% of young professionals now say that ESG is a key factor in deciding where to work. Green debt is also one of the things driving it too, with US capital markets increasing 20% with green debt issuance. Johnson Controls' own green bond was 9 times oversubscribed. So there's going to be no let up in countries making commitments and drawing up stricter regulations relating to the reporting of energy use and greenhouse emissions. And we'll see that in the upcoming climate conference in Glasgow in November. So I know, like I said, John's going to talk about this a little more, but the world's largest funds are advancing strategies with increased exposure to ESG characteristics. And this was put very succinctly by Chief Executive Larry Fink of BlackRock when he said that climate risk is now investment risk. So digitalization goals, I want to talk about technology a little bit. Digitalization goals and sustainability goals are converging. The world's buildings consume around 40% of global energy and are responsible for approximately 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. Zero carbon goals without a strategy to implement technology is an empty promise. Companies can't talk seriously about zero carbon goals for their property portfolio without discussing the cutting edge digital technology that's essential to achieving them. Neither can leaders discuss AI or artificial intelligence that squeezes new energy efficiencies out of their giant office blocks without mentioning the tons of carbon dioxide that they'll avoid emitting. And Johnson Controls is helping the world's companies to overlap with this overlap between sustainability and digitalization. Boardrooms are seeing a huge opportunity to align their sustainability and digitalization strategies. And they do this through a single pane of glass systems that allow companies to monitor and control every aspect of their building and its operations from a single dashboard. Doing so will beef up both of the strategies, accelerating decarbonization and other sustainability efforts, maximizing efficiency and productivity, and boosting health and safety. So as we probably all know, we're in the fourth industrial revolution called Industry 4.0. And this, of course, refers to the integration of physical assets with advanced digital technologies, digital twins, IoT, artificial intelligence, robots, drones, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, goes on. And these digital technologies specialize in communicating, analyzing, and acting on data, offering organizations, consumer, and society better and deeper insights. So there's an overlap now of sustainability and digitalization. And sustainability's initiatives primarily target decarbonization and a circular economy and increased health and safety, while most digitalization programs are productivity boosts, lower costs, enhanced operational predictability as their main goals. We quickly see that the intersection of these two in a Venn diagram is efficiency. A large company aiming to decarbonize its operations with no negative impact on its productivity will typically seek to use electricity more efficiently. And even if the company's goals are primarily economic rather than environmental, reduced power use will also be a target of their digitalization strategy. Now, the digitalization programs of the past have been about lower costs, not carbon footprints. But there's a logic to aligning these strategies. And the intended ends of sustainability and digitalization might differ, but the means and the actual outcomes are often the same. There are various ways that digitalization can aid a company seeking to beef up their sustainability credentials. And this extends well beyond the scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions and into the software. For example, the software can gather and analyze data about energy, water, materials, and emissions involved in the building's design, construction, operation, renovation, and end of life. And this will help to evaluate the total environmental impact that a company has, that a company's property portfolio, as well as estimate the impact of any retrofit will have. So these systems can be enhanced by digital twins, which are virtual digital counterparts of the real and physical objects and processes. AI enhanced technology can help avoid unplanned repairs and maximize the uptime of large HVAC systems. These HVAC systems they account for about 70% of a building's energy consumption. So our OpenBlue systems, or OpenBlue, help through sophisticated APIs, help to gather data from these disparate apps and systems. And whether it's AI enhanced HVAC, the remote diagnostics of a building's lighting, or predictive maintenance insights from digital twin, helps them look at it through this single pane of glass solution. And once the data is gathered in the cloud, you can get to work on connecting and analyzing and contextualizing these various data streams to gain insights. So companies are already established where they sit on, they've already established where they sit on the sustainability spectrum. And there's a scoring model which evaluates their processes, systems, and data points. And customers will have clearly defined sustainability goals. And this might be a multinational company aiming for net zero scope 1 emissions, or a manufacturer targeting a higher ESG rating, or a factory attempting to measure its EHS leading indicators. All customers are at very different stages in their sustainability journeys, but they'll all benefit from a digital backbone that allows for rapid, smooth implementation of sustainability-focused applications. So let me close up here with just integrating the sustainability with digitalization will allow companies to reach both sets of targets faster, and firms will also be able to track their progress through more efficiently, and set themselves for more ambitious goals on their path to a low carbon future. And the earliest movers can also expect a sustainability premium from their enhanced ESG credentials, because they'll make themselves more attractive to investors. So Mike, thanks for giving me a chance to say a few words. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Erik. Great to see Johnson Controls as a leader in this area. Our final guest tonight is Jon Stoyer, who has been a pioneer in developing ESG investment principles and platforms. Jon is the president and CEO of Calvert Research and Management, an investment management firm that specializes in responsible and sustainable investing across global capital markets. He's managed socially responsible investments at the request of institutional clients, including public funds, religious institutions, and college and university endowments since 1991. More recently has made that his exclusive focus, responsible and sustainable investing. Jon is a founding member of the Investor Advisory Group for the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, a group committed to improving the quality and comparability of sustainability-related disclosure by corporations that is used by investors. He's also a member of Merck's External Sustainability Advisory Council, and he's a graduate of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at UW-Madison, and a proud member of a national championship varsity men's crew team at UW. Jon, thank you for joining us. Tell us about the investment landscape and how investors meet companies on ESG measures.
Great, Mike. Great to be here. Real privilege to present along with Ratish from Kohler and Erik from Johnson Controls. You're asking me about ESG investing, and I want to just give a description. What is it? Why is it happening? Where are we with it? What are some of the problems, and what's next? So we hear a lot about ESG investing, something that my firm's been doing for many years, actually 4 decades. But recently it's become something that's quite hot on Wall Street. It's been good for us in the growth of the business. But what is it really? Mike, you mentioned this concept of employees wanting to align their job with some kind of deeper purpose, or companies kind of coalescing around a multi-stakeholder mission and vision. Ratish and Erik gave us some information about their company's approach. I'm going to tell you what it means from an investor's perspective. So for us, it's very important to understand what a company is actually doing in terms of its operations and products that are able to be measured by environmental metrics or by social or societal metrics. So, for us, and I think for many professional investors, what ESG investing really is a deep analysis of how well a management team is expending investor capital in their attempt to either mitigate environmental risk or pursue opportunities with various environmental transitions that our society is undergoing. Same story on the social side. How well is the company managing its people, its relationship with the communities in which it does business, its broader needs to maintain social license to operate? How good is management at expending corporate resources to really achieve on those needs? And what's very important is that we want to understand this within the context of long-term value creation. Is a management good enough to do all these things and improve its competitive position, take market share, and drive profitability? So it's not just the mission or the purpose or the sustainability, it's all that, but it's analyzed within the context of what an investor needs out of management, which is superior long-term return, superior long-term value creation. So in a nutshell, I think today that's what ESG investing is really all about, deep research to understand these things. Why is it happening now? What's going on? Certainly we've reached a point in terms of an understanding of the scientific basis for greenhouse gas emissions contributing to climate change. We can see the impact around us. We understand the limitations of social stability based on racism and unfair treatment of women and minorities. So we see the negative outcomes of a set of practices and processes that many companies have engaged with for a long time. We see the need to change. So I think that's really what this is all about. This is management, this is employees, investors, and companies simply saying, hey, look, we can do better. We can do better in terms of sustainability, how we treat people, and frankly, it's good for our products. And ultimately, if we're a good management team, we'll be able to bring it back home to the bottom line. Where are we in this effort, in this set of changes? I think we haven't really begun yet. So there is a lot happening in terms of companies making commitments and beginning to attend to the issue, but that's all very recent. I think JCI has been at this for a long time. It's very important to the products and the way they position themselves to solve problems for clients or customers. So it's really fit in there. I'm sure that Ratish is sensitive to issues in the supply chain and water efficiency, et cetera, for a long time. These are two great Wisconsin companies, but most companies haven't really been attending to this necessarily in that fashion, and most investors have not been focused on it. So we're very much in a position of building the market infrastructure necessary to support a greater focus on management's attention to critical environmental metrics, social factors, and of course all companies need the good governance mechanism to keep them moving forward in a positive way. So where we are is very early stages. I'd say more the end of the beginning than even well into the innings. And the regulators globally are just putting in place the disclosure information necessary for all of us to really understand what's happening within companies. On the call already, net zero emission targets have come up, and it's true that companies are really getting aggressive in making pledges to net zero carbon emissions. They're putting dates to it. 2050 is kind of the out date. How far out are you going to go? 2050 is kind of the limit, aligns with the Paris Accord. It's a big driver for doing it. However, for the most part, only a very few companies have scientific processes in place to actually achieve real net zero. Very few companies, a few, not many, but a few. Most companies have just made the pledge, and they really can't tell you or themselves exactly how they're going to get to true net zero. And we would say buying carbon offsets doesn't count. Really getting a source of energy, supply chain products to true net zero. So we applaud those pledges, and I bet, Johnson, you mentioned scientific targets a number of times. I'm sure yours are good, but for the most part, they're just guesses. And we don't even have a accepted system in audit structure to see how well companies are actually calculating their carbon emissions. So a lot of the data that we all have to work with in analyzing companies is either imputed, estimated, or coming outside of the audit and regulatory system. I'm very confident in saying we're in the early days here. We have really just begun to build the necessary data infrastructure to really make this work well. And I think that's probably the biggest problem. If you were to look at all the problems associated with this big emphasis on sustainability, environmental performance, social performance, the problems that we have not performing, and the problems that we have with companies making the pledges, most of those problems get solved with transparency and data disclosure, because that will let people see what's really happening, and problems like greenwashing or just missed goals or changing targets will go away quickly. But it will take 5 years or more to get that infrastructure in place. The Biden team really has expressed an appetite for new rulemaking. We see it in many different areas, but particularly this one. Nonetheless, those rules will take a while to be created. They'll take a while to stand up that infrastructure. Companies will get a reporting glide path that'll stretch on for years. So very, very early stages. What's the risk? The risk is that we miss these targets. The risk is that we fail on diversity, equality, and inclusion, and we hurt society. We don't get over the problems that we have in this country and in this economy with suboptimal opportunity access for many different people. We have to solve that in order for the system to strengthen and work at an optimal rate for everybody. And we have to solve these environmental problems. That's why Johnson Controls and Kohler are on it. These mean something operationally. They have to be solved. So the risk in not getting the infrastructure built, not solving some of the remaining challenges, is that we don't get to net zero by 2050, and we do really significant harm to the environment. That hurts profits, let me tell you. In many cases, companies that are actually not able to access the water that they need for their operations, you really have to slow down or shut down facilities. That actually happens. As we put a cost or price on carbon, that's going to represent rising risk, rising prices, rising costs. And the transition itself is no easy feat. So it's true we can do it on paper, but the geopolitical issues, the massive changes that we're talking about taking the whole world through, the transition from fossil fuels to renewables, that's an astounding, an incredibly ambitious effort over a fairly short time period. So we need data, we need transparency, we really need to understand what companies are doing to meet these goals, what it means, what it looks like, so we can map out the overall system. So those are my initial comments, Mike. And again, Ratish and Erik, really sounds like your companies are doing great work there. Thanks.
Well, we have 3 industry leaders here, and we couldn't be happier about that. Jon, I want to come right back to you, because it seems like you're straddling the kind of current ESG movement and something Milton Friedman would have said back in 1970 in his essay on the responsibility of a corporation, which is to maximize profits for its shareholders. Has that kind of, Erik talked about how digitalization and ESG are kind of fusing together. Would we say that kind of Friedman's view and the ESG view are fusing together because of the power and the values that consumers are bringing to the marketplace?
Well, yeah, I think that's right. Although, the ESG crowd really would never want to endorse anything Milton Friedman said.
Understood.
But I think everybody knows that he's been misunderstood, misquoted, and really the things that companies can do and should do that benefit society and the environment need to be done in a way that works for long-term value creation. I'll tell you what, even for people who really just care deeply about these issues and aren't so sensitive to financial returns, if you start an effort at a company in the United States or in any other part of the world today, and you put a big initiative in place that doesn't carry itself financially, doesn't make sense to the company within the overall strategy of the company, that is not going to amount to much of anything. You're never going to get any positive change. This is a very competitive landscape. Companies are competing with each other around energy efficiency of their products and their offerings and their own carbon footprint. So this has to be done by management teams that can do a great job at the issue, right? Saving water, creating more equal distribution of wealth, whatever their main factor set is that impacts that company. They've got to do a great job to make things better for the world, but they have to do it in a way that works for the global capitalist system, the investors. And there is no compromise. It's just one more tough thing that management's got to do in order to compete in the world today.
And all that pressure is bearing down on Erik and Ratish. Erik, has Jon captured this in the way you feel it and see it at Johnson Controls?
Yeah, I actually think he has, and the key part is around the KPIs and what actually we're going to be measuring. It's starting out with the cost of capital, as BlackRock chief executive had mentioned. There are headwinds against it too, especially as we try to electrify our businesses with renewable energy. And the cost of renewable energy sources, that has to come down. It has to be more efficient. That's why I was in wind energy for a while and working on the efficiencies of wind energy. But on the other side of it, back towards, okay, cost of capital, but also the value of buildings are going to be related to their ESG score. We're already seeing this, that higher lease rates for buildings that have higher ESG scores, that you're able to attract employees by having higher ESG scores, because not only is it something that people feel better about, but they're also healthier and more productive. So there has to be green behind the green, and we're seeing that now. So I thought it was well captured there.
And Ratish, how do you experience that at Kohler?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike, for asking that. I would agree with Jon and his comment about the financial sustainability in addition to the environmental sustainability of these choices, right? I think, to me, it comes down to, what does sustainability really mean, right? It's the ability to sustain, right? So that, by definition, tells you that you're designing something, whether it's a process or a product or a program or whatever it is, that has the ability to sustain. And just by the virtue of that definition, to do that, if it cannot self-sustain, you're at some point you're going to lose the fuel. So to Jon's point, I mean, I would say that there is, like in our case, because our leadership truly does care about the issue, we do always prioritize that, and sometimes make choices that may not always be the same choice we would have made without an environmental lens. But then, it's, in my opinion, you can't actually move the needle without truly integrating this into how you do business on a daily basis, right? It cannot be a thing to the side. It cannot be a thing that you look at after you make all the choices and then, okay, let's look at the environmental impact of this, and then, and let's just, move forward with that. It really has to be part of your decision making. It really has to be part of the criteria that you use to select and make choices, and then really finish the design of the product or the process, whatever it is that you're working on. So I would agree with Jon's comments. I think financial sustainability is truly foundational to longer term existence of this.
Yeah, I think looking back, when Friedman wrote about that topic, this wasn't really an issue that consumers thought about the way they do today. And consumers are really hungry for this, and it can be a winning strategy for companies to pay careful attention. And then, of course, that underscores the need for transparency and better data and KPIs, so that consumers really know they're buying from companies that are truly walking the walk. But it's a very, very interesting issue. We have a question from Charles Weiss in the audience. What is something that each of you have done at your companies under the banner of ESG that you wouldn't have done otherwise? which in light of our conversation could be viewed as a trick question. But maybe not, because companies can also lead consumers to thinking better about the right choices too. So I'll throw that out there. Ratish, do you have anything you would offer up on that?
Yeah, there are a few things. I think one of the things we're trying to really truly institutionalize as part of our product design process is this concept called design for the environment, right? It's, so we all design for quality. We've always designed for cost. We've always designed for, offering a gracious experience to the consumer, which is really our mission. But this is something that we're starting to operationalize more and more in our product development process, is designing something for the environment. And it has become something that we're trying to scale it across our product development process, and really thinking about, when we initiate a project, how do we think about what is the impact of the choices we're going to make, whether it's the supply chain, the components that we procure, or are they locally sourced versus not? What sort of environmental footprint or carbon footprint does the manufacturing of the product have? What sort of footprint does the consumer use of the product have? The disposition on all of that. And the design for environment process really allows us to take a holistic look at the entire life cycle phase of the product, and really help us make choices that drive to not just environmental favorability, but also, make sure that we're not making trade-offs as it relates to cost or performance or quality and other things. So I'd say that that's something that we started a few years ago, and we're really starting to scale and operationalize within our product development process. Probably something we wouldn't have done without the rigor and the discipline, and really the ambition that we have to be an environmental steward. The other thing I would point out is, our CEO back in 2008 really went out there and made a bold commitment of net zero by 2035 across our operations. And to me, it was made at a time when net zero wasn't cool. Jon and Erik were pointing out how companies are coming out and making commitments almost on a daily basis now, right? So that was to me something that he did, because he truly felt that we need to leave the world a better place than we found it, and we need to do it through our operations and through the products that we make. So I think that is also something that happened because of the belief that the leadership team had that we need to make a difference, not because financial existence was the only belief. So I'd say those are probably the two examples I can think of that truly emerged out of our desire and our ambition to be a steward of the environment.
And Kohler is in an interesting place as a private company, where you can put your resources toward those things and maybe be a leader in ways that would be harder if you were a public company, potentially.
Yeah, it gives, we have a unique opportunity to think a little more longer term than the next quarter, and really think about how can we use our resources and be more, drive innovation in some of these areas, and think longer term, from a sustainability standpoint.
And even from purely economic standpoint, if you prove to be moving in the right direction, you're going to get a lot of credit for that down the road. Very interesting. Yep. Erik, could you say anything about Johnson Controls under the ESG banner? What did you do that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise?
Yeah, I'll take that trick question, Mike. And the thing about, so last year, as we were talking about our ESG goals and that for the company, my salespeople were asking, well, what can we do about it? And so one thing I did differently last year, and it took me till last year to do, but I put one of the things that our salespeople can do is to affect avoided emissions. They may not be able to affect, excuse me, some of the different areas, but the avoided emission piece they can. And so I put that into our KPIs, and I actually put it into their commission plan to track avoided emissions and to aggregate avoided emissions from customers. So that's part of why they're helping customers. And on a broader scale, looking at Johnson Controls, George Oliver, our CEO, he's on the business roundtable for for President Biden, and he recently became chair of the Energy and Environment Committee. But George has taken that and actually put our sustainability and diversity goals into the senior leaders performance assessment. So it's going to be linked to executive compensation to drive accountability in the company. And then with extending that out a little further, we've weighted sustainability equal to our other key metrics when we look at supplier performance. So the evaluations provide a preference. Our evaluations provide a preference for suppliers that with the excellent sustainability ratings. So some of the things we're doing differently.
And Jon,
Mike,
I guess you do everything under the ESG banner now. So
we do. Well, I'm going to come at it from a little different angle, but I also want to applaud particularly Erik's comments about linking executive comp to actual sustainability achievements. That's really best practice, and that's reflective of so many of the things that that we hear out of JCI. Taking it a little different angle, one of the interesting things about Calvert is that we were the 65th signatory to the United Nations Global Compact, which was created by Kofi Annan and is the entity that created, amongst many other things, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so as a result of being one of the very early signatories to the Global Compact, I think there's more than 20,000 signatories today. We also helped to draft the UN Principles for Responsible Investing, as well as what is now the UN Women's Principles. So we've had this long relationship with the UN, primarily through the Global Compact. And I would just suggest to listeners who tune in, who are interested in sustainable business and sustainable development, to check out UN Global Compact, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Principles for Responsible Investing. There are vast networks of executives, CEOs, and investors, and students and professors. Everybody from all over the world can come on, work on some of these collaboration networks. It's a great community. So people who are interested in responsible investing, any place in the world or globally, sustainability, sustainable development goals, these are just huge repositories of information and innovation. And Calvert, just as I don't think that most people who run public investment companies, companies that invest in publics, don't get to do that. So that's, I think, one of the great parts about running this particular firm is the opportunity to give back and work with the UN on these projects.
Thank you, Jon. James Nelkin wonders how companies will deal with the increased risk of cyber attacks. And of course, I guess those attacks could disable some of the digital tools that are used to support or report and implement ESG initiatives. Thoughts about that, Erik? You might be in the best position to talk about that, and maybe a comment about cyber attacks more broadly even would be appropriate.
Yeah, cyber attacks are, they're going to happen. They've been making the news lately, especially with the pipeline shutdown and that. When I was doing IoT in Silicon Valley, it was the main thing. It has to be built in from the beginning, from the ground level, the security of the systems. But it's not that, okay, I've created a system and now it's secure. Security from a cyber perspective is a cat and mouse game. It's going to change every day. So you have to have good defense in depth kind of mechanisms so that when you do get hacked, that you have a way of recovery, of being resilient, not just secure, but resilient. And so there's a lot of new services that start with doing a cybersecurity assessment of the environment. There's some very simple things that can be done that can make a company or even a household more secure. The people that are out hacking systems are, one, looking to make a name for themselves, but two, they're looking for easy targets. So first off, don't be an easy target. And if you do some basic things, it helps. But there are other things that you need to do that are specific, and you need to build it in from the beginning. It's I won't say very difficult. It's impossible to add on later, because you already have all these threat surfaces available that people can exploit. And it's something that you have to do different every single day. So you need to have people that are well-versed in it, subject matter experts. And frankly, that's why there's a dearth of subject matter experts when it comes to cybersecurity. There aren't enough of them right now to go around. We need more. So it's not an easy answer. It's something we're going to live with, but we've got to manage it every single day.
It might be hard to attract cybersecurity experts when the hackers are getting paid the way they are. Ratish, do you have thoughts about that at the Kohler Company? Cyber risk and ESG, or even more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, it's it is certainly a risk. I mean, the uncontrolled nature of AI has always been identified as a risk across different dimensions of the business, not just ESG, to be quite honest. But from an ESG perspective, I think a lot of our data management, our metrics, our reporting does happen on a certain portal. So there is a very clear and an inherent risk. We haven't necessarily had to deal with that specifically, but it also is because of all the platforms and securities that we have in place through our IT teams. I think it's one of those things that the day if we have to deal with it, we'll be too late. So we'll probably need to be prepared ahead of time. There are some tools that ESG accounting practices have now offered that really allow us to build that robustness around security and cybersecurity, to be particular. And that, I think, as we mature in this space, that might be something we would look to in the future of adopting.
Let me move to a new question, and I'll start with Jon on this one because I know you're very involved in it. Jemmy Chayati wonders, how do you see the role of ESG accounting to achieve sustainability goals, including net zero targets? And how can we expedite a common and global ESG accounting standard that we can all agree on?
Yep. Very relevant question. And as long as the all doesn't include Americans and Europeans in the same room, we should have this done quickly. But I think the reality is that, as I mentioned earlier, the regulators are beginning to build out this infrastructure. So the SEC has an open comment period that's going on right now. You can go to their website. There are 15 questions about ESG risk disclosure. The first 14 are all about climate. But anybody can fill that out, Jemmy. You can do it, and you can tell the SEC what to do. So that is participation. They take these seriously. Comment period closes June 13th. Obviously, Calvert's submitting. Lots of other issuers and securities around the world are submitting. But this is a major step forward in gathering the market information to begin to build these rules. And what the SEC has got a primary question in front of them: do they set the standards themselves, or do they set up an outside third-party standard setter like FASB? Now, I'm channeling my freshman year accounting class here, but do they create a third-party standard setter like FASB that's got a governance structure around it that may even become something that is almost globally used, or at least forms the basis for other jurisdictional framework? So that's the big question. Or do they try to set the standards themselves? Because it answers the rest of the question. How do you get specific calculation methodologies? So when JCI says, these are our carbon emissions, they're using the same calculation as when Kohler calculates their carbon emissions. And it goes through an audit system, then it goes out in some kind of a filing that goes through a regulatory process. That'll nail everything down. And I think we'll get there, but not nearly as fast as we want, because you also said a lot in your question, Jemmy, everyone can agree on. So really, there is a little issue between the US and the EU. And guess what? There's a new player on the table. That's China. They want in on this too. And it's important to make this as big of a tent as possible, because greenhouse emissions are a global issue, and there are human rights, ethics, and equality issues at play. Simply stated, everybody needs to respect the fact that the US, the UK, and the EU had like a century of running room. We're the people who put all the stuff up in the air through our industrialization and our processes. Now, Indonesia, China, India, they want to come along the development train also. And we're telling them, wait a minute, not with that dirty fuel. You got to clean up first. Renewables only for you. So there are a lot of issues here at play and a lot of geopolitics to be dealt with. So it's a big question, simply stated. It's happening. It's going to take a decade to get this squared off. I think the biggest risk is we don't get it in place fast enough to really solve the problems we've got.
Any follow-up to that, Erik or Ratish, or should we move to another question?
I've got nothing to add what Jon said, so well done.
Yeah, we can move on.
Brian Frona wonders, what role do you think governments can or should play in driving sustainability and zero carbon goals, specifically in terms of fiscal and tax policies? Erik?
So I know Brian, and nice to see you on the call. I'll be quick, but this is such a massive transition that we're talking about, and there are so many issues associated with social justice involved here that we need government to play a very significant hand in helping the world go through these two major transitions. One is the energy system transition. I think the other major issue is the way that we create access to all the things that everybody needs to have a successful life here in a way that is completely equitable. So there are two major transitions. The first one can be very disruptive geopolitically. The second one involves a lot of guidance from government. So I think a bigger role than any of us can really endorse. It's a big role. We need help getting through this.
I'll just add a couple of things to Jon's comments there. I think I mentioned about the European Community Pledge. There's also a renovation wave in Europe, where there's a commitment to double the pace of the renovation of buildings to cut carbon. In the US, there's the Biden administration's Build Back Better directive for federal agencies to cut emissions. And then also to renovate 4 million buildings, 18 times what has been done, accelerating it 18 times what it was before. So governments are going to have to play a role. And it depends on what they can do there, but they will be involved.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick, Mike. I think governments will have to play a very critical role, especially when it comes to scale. And I think one of the things that they could consider doing to really drive that accountability for net zero is some sort of a concept of carbon tax. What does that mean? How do you drive that accountability and ownership, whether it's at the company level, at the country level, at the administration level, on whatever the net zero targets are. What happens if you don't meet them, right? I mean, that's right now nothing. So how do you drive that accountability and ownership through some sort of a policy that incentivizes them without actually being punitive for not meeting it, but really incentivizes them for meeting it? So I think they do have a role to play.
Jon, you seem most involved with some of the international efforts here. And I'm just going to ask you, do you worry about increasingly nationalistic countries being forced to solve increasingly global problems?
Yes, I think that the differences in governance systems and cultures between the U.S. and some of our other large countries around the world are significant. We place different values on human rights issues in some of these big economies, and I do think that we have many potential conflicts associated with these changes. I talked briefly about the redrawing of a geopolitical map associated with the energy transition. 75% of the fossil fuel reserves in the world today are owned by state actors like Russia, Iraq, Iran, Venezuela, Nigeria, others. And if you take away that source of revenue, some of those economies will pivot, but many of them won't. Many of them are already weak, kind of corrupt petrostates. So we have a very serious situation to deal with from a geopolitical and a foreign policy perspective, and it matters to all companies who are doing business globally. So I definitely agree. We definitely want to save the planet. We want to do something about emissions in a big way. Net zero pledges are great, but this is an enormously complex change that we're talking about. So Frona asked about fiscal policy, tax policy. We talked about a carbon credit. A carbon tax, price on carbon. All those things are part of it. But just really, if you just pencil out the scope of change that we're talking about when we talk about actually meeting a net zero goal for 2050. We can do it. We've got the technology, and many people on the call would say it's all about time and money, right? But when you think about the ramifications of this change, you really begin to appreciate the vast transformation of this entire system that we're talking about here.
Well said. Well, we are past the top of the hour, and so it's time for me to thank all of you for joining us tonight. This was a really interesting program. Really enjoyed hearing from all of you and the companies that you represent. Really proud to have two great leading companies right in Wisconsin, and a great leading investment firm headed by a Badger. That's wonderful to see. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and thanks to our audience for some great questions. We are, of course, now on our summer schedule, so we'll be back in 2 weeks on June 15th, where we will be talking about cybersecurity and ransomware. So please tune in again in 2 weeks' time. We'll have another great program for you. And until then, on Wisconsin.
You can try, but you'll never stop a Badger. Because we Badgers are born with curious minds and endless heart. When we see a curve in the road, we speed up. When there are mask shortages for first responders, we make our own supply chain. When there's a world on pause, we sharpen our claws. Through thunder, fire, and pandemics, we'll keep going. Because after all, you can't stop a Badger.